Hi, this is Mr. Price. We are looking at Chapter 10, Section number 1, and we're going to talk about cell growth. Some of the things that affect cell growth are DNA overload, which I was given the analogy that it's like the Roman Empire, and what happened was if you have a really large cell, it's really hard to get all of that information, all the communication needed to run everything in the cell. RNA and messenger RNA, transfer RNA have a hard time filling all of their obligations and duties, if you will, in a larger cell with more volume. There's a huge exchange of materials that happens, and natural diffusion can't occur in larger cells. So what we see is that cells tend to be between 5 micrometers and 500 micrometers for a large amoebas because of that material exchange and diffusion keeping up with that. So again, we can only saturate so much oxygen into the middle of that cell at a certain rate during diffusion. Same thing goes for glucose, and then inversely getting materials out such as CO2 in our body. So it has a hard time moving these materials and with free energy diffusion in most cases. So what I was talking about is that this cell will be able to saturate itself quicker because of its smaller surface area and it's because of that less volume. So it'll be able to have diffusion of, let's say, oxygen moving inside of that cell quicker. So if we're diffusing things into the cell like oxygen, it's going to happen quicker than it is to the center of this cell. So oxygen is going to take longer to get to the middle of the cell, and then even longer in this cell for oxygen to saturate the center of this cell. So here's a great video on YouTube. You should be able to click on this and watch it. It explains this surface area to volume ratio really well, and it talks about diffusion and how things take so long. But I do also want you to realize too, it takes longer for, let's say, CO2, if it were a gas that this is using, to get out in a larger cell with larger volume. So that ratio of surface area to volume becomes very important when it comes to cell size. So why are cells on the planet Earth the size that they are? They're the size that they are because innately that volume will always increase faster than the surface area and what can keep up. And cells that are too large can't therefore transport enough materials to maintain equilibrium or maintain their basic necessities such as making ATP and keeping homeostasis of solutes inside. So we have issues getting enough food in the form of glucose to the center of that cell if it's a large cell. And then we have a water issue, also diffusion of water, osmosis in and out of the cell. We got to get all the waste out of the cell because, again, that CO2 could poison cells if it doesn't diffuse out quickly enough. So what happens then? And if you were paying attention during that very first slide, why do we go then through a process called cell division? Why do we go through PMAT? It's because we figured out a long time ago that cells get to a certain size, and then what happens, instead of just growing and growing and growing and growing, where the cell membrane would eventually fail, we actually divide up that volume into 2 different cells, and we go from 1 parent cell to 2 daughter cells. And in mitosis, those 2 daughter cells are perfectly genetically identical to each other. So during interphase, and more specifically the S phase of interphase, we're going to copy all the DNA so both these daughter cells will have an exact copy of all the genetic information needed to run all of their functions. Again, because of that surface to volume ratio, it's better and it's easier for all the DNA to communicate. So what are the problems that we solved, and why do cells divide? So we solved that issue being a smaller cell, if you will, again between 5 micrometers and 500 micrometers, is we keep that surface area small enough, therefore keeping the volume small enough that diffusion, which is free energy, if you will, moving materials in and out of the cell. So that makes it easier, again, for like oxygen and all of our body cells to go across the cell membrane and be able to saturate the center of the cell. And it also solves the issue of DNA overload, meaning all the demands that are put on the metabolic processes of a cell are simplified, if you will, because the size of the cell is smaller. So it's like surface ratio to volume simplifies these other ones. It puts less demand on DNA, and it makes transportation of materials a lot easier. So I hope that helped, and thanks for listening to 10-1.